now is the time to welcome our second speaker, and it's Robertson from the University College of the Cayman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Covenant post-lunch presentation. It's a really different presentation. It's a bit of a case study on what's happening in the Caribbean. So anyway, my name is Bob Robertson. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, hence the accent. Currently live in Tampa, Florida, but I work in Georgetown in the Cayman Islands. And the case study is actually about the Bahamas, where I worked for about 6 years. The thrust of the case study is about skills and developing skills using online. And I think most of you know that the European Union has declared 2023 the year of skills. There's a skills deficiency around the world, in many parts of the world, including Canada, the United States, the Caribbean. And so what we're looking at in terms of this presentation, which we did have online a few minutes ago, we're look at how online can supplement the development of skills in the region of the Caribbean in particular. So as I said, we're going to look at the Caribbean digital skills and trying to, in particular, prepare people for the future of work in the region. So if we can just move on to probably the third slide. There's my bio, which we've already talked about. Go to the next one. So the context, which I'm sure affects everybody, but it's rather unique in the Caribbean, is that education is being impacted by demographics, believe it or not, in the Caribbean in particular, technology and globalization. I think it applies to some extent pretty well everywhere, but in demographics, there's a lot of out-migration from the Caribbean, brain drain, mostly to the United States, but also to other parts, in the Cayman in particular, to the UK. But there's a lot of that which you don't see so much of in places like Canada, for example. Canada actually has, the replacement rate is 2.1. Canada has a growth rate of about 1.5. So to replace population, Canada goes to mostly former British colonies and recruits people. So from the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands or anywhere else, and they recruit people to come, which means people who stay there don't have the prerequisite skills, and a lot of people sort of come in. Coming into the Bahamas in particular, there's a lot of Haitians who come in, and most of them are illegal, and I'll speak to why that's important in a minute. Technology can certainly help to assist in some of the training that is required, I think, and I'll show you 2 examples from both the pandemic and Hurricane Dorian, which will illustrate that. And globalization is important as well. So if you talk to many people in both of those islands, the Bahamas or the Cayman, they are taking courses from UL or other parts of the world. So I just had a workshop with Coursera last week, and their prognosis is that many schools, traditional schools, brick and mortar schools in the Latin American context and the Caribbean are likely destined to close in the next 4 or 5 years. And you see that in the US as well. A lot of schools are closing or they're in financial difficulties. So the next one. In terms of online, most of you know the University of the West Indies has been around for quite some time in terms of online education. They're closely aligned with the University of London. They have had increased interest in online because of COVID in particular. And there's general data about UNESCO's numbers of students who've missed 2 years basically of education. CARICOM, which is the Caribbean Regional Consortium, says there needs to be kind of a movement from COVID to quality, because most people in the Caribbean, it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. If your course wasn't online ready, it was just shifted online. And one of the problems with that is it turned a lot of people off because the quality of the online programming was not so good. Maybe the next one. So what we used was the Commonwealth of Learning, which I think many of you are familiar with. It's located in Burnaby, British Columbia. It's a networking consortium that looks at best practices. I know Linda's familiar with it, but we actually partnered with them, fortunately, before COVID and before Dorian, and provided training to our faculty. So we kind of moved online before those 2 big events, and I'll speak to the importance of those events in a minute. And we were prepared for both of those events. So just as a quick example to make you think about the context of that, Dorian was a hurricane in 2019. The high school in the area that was hit first by Dorian is still not open. So 3 years later. Now you can take courses in that area, but it's by online because the high school is gone. So I'll just show you an example from the context of The Bahamas. So the Bahamas is about 400,000 people, 300,000 legal residents and 100,000 mostly Haitians, which is important because when you look at the data from Dorian, for example, you'll see that there were about 50 people who were killed officially, but the real number is about 300. About 250 non-legal people were killed, and they're not accounted for in any data. The GDP at about 12 billion is fairly impressive for the region, as is the per capita, but the problem is it's not distributed equally. It's very high and very low. The tourism piece is very important in the Bahamas. A lot of back of house operations, data intensive and financial. Most of you have FTX. No. The unemployment rate is about 15%. During COVID, it was 40%. It's systemically at 15% because a lot of people just don't have the right skills. And the high school graduation rate is about 50%. 50% pass, 50% fail, approximately. The 50% who fail usually pick up a skill and they go to HM prison. That's the skill they get. We're teaching courses there, so I know that is a fact. Anyway, the point about this slide, I always tell people that this is exactly like Canada. The large geographically dispersed population. You're not going to build a school on every one of those islands. They're not all populated for one, but there's 700 islands in the Bahamas. Some of them are populated. The only way to deliver good quality programming in terms of like chemistry or math or something like that is through online. There's no way you're going to put a math teacher on all those islands. The hurricane, by the way, went up the left or right hand side and went straight across the Abacos and Grand Bahama. We can go to the next one. This is Baha Mar. It is a 4,000 room hotel. Shows you the kind of context of what is required in terms of support. And interestingly, this hotel is owned by the government of China. Not a company in China, but the government of China. So it's a soft political statement. The government of China also built for the Bahamas a 15,000 seat football stadium as well. So China is very active in the region, not just in the Bahamas, but in the region generally. Next one. So they also like to bring in a lot of technology and provide that to the schools, which, you know, may be a problem. Probably we need to think about that. So anyway, Dorian is a really crested storm, winds of about 185 miles an hour, slow moving. Took 3 days to cross the top of the archipelago. The next one. It contaminated groundwater to this day with salt water. So one of our campuses, you get to the roof and look around, you can't see water anywhere. And water was in that building to the height of this ceiling. We had people on the floor above it, but they were safe. 75 to 80% of the homes in Abaco were damaged. And the estimates at 3.4 billion is equivalent in the United States of taking out the GDP of Texas, California, and Florida combined. So this will take years to get past. That's the University of the Bahamas. Not in construction, by the way. That's post-Dorian. And this is our campus. It's like that for over 2 years. And so that had a big impact in terms of online, which we'll get to in a second. But COVID also had the same impact. So just briefly, I won't read this slide to you, but we had 500 courses that moved from face-to-face to online within 72 hours because we were ready. The Ministry of Education took 7 months to move everything to online. And on day one, when they opened, the whole system crashed. So there were another 3 months of no teaching. So 9 months of nothing. They also gave out all kinds of devices to students. So every student in the country had 1.2 devices per student. Where are they? If you did a tracker study of those or a tracer study, they were all sold for, I don't know, cigarettes or pop or whatever, but they're not being used for educational purposes. Many of those devices, by the way, came from the government of China. I think you've all seen some of this information on the thing. The bottom one about workforce skills, though, is important. One of the things that we used in our school was something called the National Center for Construction Education and Research. I always point this out to people interested in online because you can actually teach trade skills online. So NCCER is a globally recognized credential. It's like Red Seal in the United States or the apprenticeship program you have in the UK. The first course is 80 hours, totally virtual, probably about safety on the job site, but then it moves increasingly to a blended format. But at the end, you can almost get to the point where you get an AWS, an American Welding certification, almost totally online through simulation and a test at the end face to face. But it just shows you the range, and we've seen some of that through AI, the range of things that can happen through online, as opposed to some of the stuff we're used to. I think the next one is yeah, go to the next one. So the next one will start on the case study. So as I mentioned, we went fully online within 72 hours, but we did a survey, which I think is really important. A lot of places didn't do this, particularly during COVID, because they were kind of busy. And the reason for the survey being important is because most people in the region suggest that online is kind of okay if you have to, but it's not really necessary. They're not really supportive of it. And after COVID, they kind of slipped back to the old model. But I keep pointing out the data strongly suggests that, you know, students were really satisfied. And if you remember back to the map, one of the things that's important is that if you live on one of those outward islands and you don't have online, your option is to quit. So as I left my job in the Bahamas, the incoming president, who didn't really like online very much, said to me, "We're going to slow down up online." I said, "I don't think that's a good idea." And sure enough, policemen, firemen, people who were posted to those outward islands came in mass and said, "We have to continue online." Because the data suggests that they appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that, whereas otherwise they had no options. And so the data is very helpful. And in fact, online continues. So most people thought program quality was good too. That was mostly because of the partnership with the Commonwealth of Learning. I think one of the things regionally is that the quality of teaching needs to be improved, particularly online. Faculty engagement, it's kind of spotty, but the numbers are fairly good at 85%. The one thing that, and we use Moodle, by the way, the one thing that people really enjoy, and I think you all know this, is the fact that it's not just the kind of traditional, you know, online. It's got video and other things involved in it, which you heard from the previous presentation are so critical. The challenges, well, internet is spotty in some places in the Bahamas, but as I point out to people who don't like online, I usually just hold up my phone and say Exhibit A. Every student has a mobile phone. And so at some level, they have the capacity to do online courses. So most people, again, almost 85% said they're satisfied with it. The lack of computer equipment we got around by virtue of donations from different groups, including the Chinese government, but also we had loaners that we gave out. So our online efforts, we had in 2016 about 2,000 students. We still have about 2,000 traditional students, perhaps down a little bit, but the overall institutional student body is at 6,000. So 4,000 students are taking courses online, non-traditional students, which I call non-traditional students. So their courses are shorter, they're focused, they're certificate-based, diploma-based. They lead to a degree at some point, but they're stackable. And so people are looking for a credential that they can get in and out with. My experience both in the region and in the United States is that and is exactly the same. Traditional student enrollment is static. It's not going up. It's been down about 1 million a year in the US for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's not just COVID related. So what people are looking for on the bottom are accelerated courses focused on a skill that have to be industry certified, like CompTIA if it's in technology or Cisco or something like that. And in particular, the NCCER courses I told you about, the technical and trades training programs, which are largely online as well, which surprised many people in the Bahamas in particular. The only way to get the Bahamas interested in online technical training was to physically bring the Ministry of Education to a school in the US that had those capacities and show him a simulated welding machine, which costs $150,000, which is why we didn't have one in the Bahamas. But it actually allows you to do that. So that's how we really grew our programs, with these short, accelerated, primarily online programs. We worked with a lot of partners, different community clubs like the Rotary Club, Kiwanis, Lions, and they provided devices and scholarships. They were very supportive of online. The Royal Bank of Canada had a system in place where they had a fundraising race for kids where we pushed a lot of this into high school through dual enrollment. We looked at industry recognized certifications, which were transferable to university degrees. Many of the students who came through these shorter programs with us ended up going to big schools in the States like Purdue, Georgia Tech, et cetera. And we actually cribbed, which I didn't know at the time, both. We established our own Center for Distance and Online Education. I didn't realize you had one here, so you can sue me. But
So right, go around the move online and then just.
yeah, we were a little different, but it didn't go good on the t-shirt, that's why. So we did that for research training and support, and it remains fairly active to this day. So the questions or problems that come out of the Caribbean, this is a different survey. So if you survey instructors at schools now, there's really no incentives to continue online. So they feel like they were pushed online by either the hurricane or COVID, but there's no really compelling reason to stay online or to go online. It really requires an upgrading of teacher skills. And I know you have some good teacher skill programs here. And also because of the nature of the people we're trying to encourage to go online, most of, as I said, there's a fairly strong income in both the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands, but it's not distributed equally. So in terms of low incomes and affordability, a lot of people are just missing the boat, literally, and they're not able to, they're not interested in going online. Most employers in the region also suggest that the regional workforce is not globally competitive. About 65% of employers say that they can't find skilled people. And so they bring them in from anywhere else in the world. The Philippines, Vietnam, Mexico. And so there's a systemic problem there with respect to workforce skills. User capacity or capability, there's not a lot of digital literacy at the lower grades in particular in the Bahamas or in the Cayman. And so there needs to be some capacity to do that. In the Bahamas, we were an open access school, and I was shocked to find that a lot of people coming into the program could neither read nor do anything related to math. Now, there are really good software programs that will allow you to pick up those skills, but teachers in particular were reluctant to use them because they felt that it would take away their jobs. Alex is a math program we eventually use. I'm not sure you're familiar with it, but it improves math scores from a D to a B within 3 or 4 months, basically. And it's, you know, it's pretty simplistic, and you know this yourself. If you're not good at math and the teacher asks you a question, you're not going to put up your hand and embarrass yourself. But if the computer asks you a question, you're alone, and it plays a game with you, you're more inclined to answer the question, and it'll help you improve. That's what Alex does in my simplistic version of it. There's also a reading system which does the same. So we spend a lot of time and energy on basic skills. The infrastructure as well in the rural areas, in particular, in some of the small islands, is not that good. So in summary, there's big challenges everywhere with respect to online, but the Bahamas suffer still from the hurricane, and guess what? Next month is hurricane season again. So that's a problem, and the global pandemic has reduced you know, people's capacity in terms of skills, basic skills, reading and writing by a year or 2, according to data in the region. Dorian and COVID combined in the Bahamas equals about 60% of the GDP. And there's really no plan from a public policy point of view to try to address that, which is very unfortunate. The online opportunities were afforded to us by those 2 disasters in that region in particular, but they still provide a significant opportunity for, you know, changes. If they could move sort of to these shorter, you know, focused courses, I think it would be a lot better. Because not a lot of students in either of those regions of the Caribbean, to my mind, who you can go to and say, I'd like you to take this online course. It starts in September, it ends in December, and you got January to April. They don't think that way anymore. I'd like to see one in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, focus on a particular topic, move on. And that mindset change needs to occur at government in particular, the ministerial level, but also in the ministries of education, and then down to the teachers and students. So I think that's about it. Oh no, yeah. So this one just sort of covers a synopsis of what I was just talking about. We had a lot of partnerships, fortunately, with Commonwealth of Learning. We had, one thing that wasn't mentioned much of today was this training course for students. A lot of students, even in the US, take an online course and they don't get any training in terms of what online is expecting of them. So the dropout rate continues to be very high for new students taking a first time online course. There needs to be something to kind of a little bit of a carrot instead of a stick to get them interested in it. But there needs to be a real effort to sustain online generally. In my experience, I'm currently teaching a class in Vietnam at the Samsung factory, which is if you have a Samsung phone, I can probably talk to the guy who built it for you if you want. But they have a significant effort to upskill their management group. So it's an MBA course, and they take this class sponsored by Samsung in situ. So I teach online, and I physically go there in about a month's time to spend a few days with them at the end. But I see a lot of companies are doing that now. And so companies are basically telling, pardon me if you're an academic here, companies are basically telling academics and people in educational institutions, we don't like your product. We're going to build our own. So increasingly companies are doing that. They're building their own products. Just look around. Google has their own courses, Meta, all those people have their own courses now. And the reason for that is and the data suggests this as well, 7 out of 10 employers don't trust schools to deliver the products they want. They're just doing their own. So it's good for me. I get to go to Hanoi for a couple of weeks, but you know, the online effort, I think, could address that. That's the problem. So a lot of schools are having difficulty in North America, at least, because of the fact they're not addressing those issues. And my last slide, this is the one where I'm going to tell you it's 28 degrees and sunny. Believe it or not, that's the view I had from my balcony in Nassau, the Bahamas. A cruise ship going in and out. I'm sitting there on the balcony, just thinking, like, wow, it's cold and snowy and rainy. Wow. I used to think that every day. Well, originally in Canada, I would send a picture like that to my kids every time it was snowy and cold. Anyway, sorry, it's spotty going through some of that, but I appreciate the patience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Have some time for questions.
So I'm really interested to hear what you said in the presentation about kind of the demand for kind of alternative qualifications, not like full degrees or long courses. And as you're probably aware, not just in Europe, but all around the world, there are governments and other organizations that are kind of developing frameworks for things like micro-credentials. And there's a big question about, you know, where do higher education institutions, what role do they play in making sure that we're developing appropriate micro-credentials to meet these kind of demands. And I just wonder, from your point of view, do you think that's something that to kind of even out that balance between kind of competitive, I suppose, i.e. big organizations just developing their own kind of onboarding and their own courses, whereas that could be something where higher education institutions could still play a part in developing these kind of alternative qualifications.
Yeah, for sure. I do some consulting to Southern New Hampshire University. If you go to the States or you've seen something recently, Southern New Hampshire is a not-for-profit, but it advertises a lot. But its trajectory is like this. It's growing on gangbusters. Whereas a lot of other even traditional schools are going the other way. So what they've started to do is embed in their MBA courses credentials. And credentials basically like critical thinking, decision making, pretty basic things, but they're offered by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, I believe. So you get a CPU or CPEU here? But it's a part of all the MBA courses if you have these. They've also introduced micro credentials as well, and those are the areas that are really growing because people want to see an ROI on their investment. I mean, they want to see it, not in 4 years or 2 years, and their employers are paying for it, which is the case with Samsung. Samsung's paying for these people to take these courses, and so they're short, focused courses, but they have credentials in them, embedded right in the course, and it carries a little bit of weight, in terms of points, and it's not. It's one of those things you can take multiple times. If somebody says, what are you really learning? But you stack all of those together and you're probably learning quite a bit. So those are the pieces that are growing. But a lot of the big schools are really suffering, even the public schools, and they're going to see reduced investment as a result.
Okay, yeah, it's a major area of development, and the European Union developed in this very important framework for macro-credentials. Unfortunately, the UK decided to go a little lower. Yeah, but on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff happening in the area of macro-credentials. I have a question, Bob, about these vocational courses, which sound a very nice idea for providing skills to local people and non-local people. What happens with the hands-on practical skills that need to be taught? How do you address this kind of issue?
So they're blended, but the start of the program, it's a series of 5 steps. So the first step, and even the sort of the core of the first step is the core for all trades. Then you go into carpentry or plumbing or whatever different steps. But so the first one is 100% online. It's basic stuff about safety on the job and how to be involved in online. But then it increasingly goes to face. So at the end, step 5, you're basically an apprentice and you're in a job site. But the point is, at the start, it is totally online. And the reason why that's important is because irrespective of what you think your job is going to be, even in the trades, at some point you need to be online. So just as an example, recently I was on a job site in the Bahamas on a private island building multi-billion-dollar homes, very exclusive. Everybody on the job site had their tool belt, and in their tool belt they had a device. And the device for everybody on the job site was critical. So tomorrow at 10 a.m., I'm going to get 400 2x4s arriving on a ship at dock number 3. They knew everything. They were all interconnected, even the carpenters. So it's critical. And they were using high-end Italian marble for the floor, very expensive housing. But all these technical people had a device in their tool belt.
Okay, that's very interesting. So part of the course is developing this digital skills to be able to manage the work.
Correct.
Very cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. Fascinating. Thinking about how people are developing digital skills. You talked about some people coming in from, with very open educational experiences, unable to read and write, perhaps. What was the design to help them develop their digital skills?
I didn't speak much about this, but what we did was we really started an aggressive dual enrollment program. High schools were in particular not addressing it. Like you saw the data, 50% pass, 50% fail. So by grade 10, you're in the pass grade or in the fail grade. And if you're already in grade 10 and they kind of slotted you into the fail grade, you're just there putting in time. So we developed programs that picked up those people in particular and streamed them into maybe a technical field if that's where they were going. But we gave them the remedial math and reading in a way, partly mostly online, frankly, but in a way that, kind of incented them. Whereas otherwise they were lost. And they would end up in prison. We were doing prison training, so I got to see a lot of them in that capacity and asked them, like, how did you, I know how you got here, but how did you get here? And even in the prison, the recidivism rate was almost 100% because when you came out, you hadn't learned anything else other than how to spend time in the cell by yourself. So we gave them some training, and many of them went on, well, not many, but about 30% of them went on not to come back into prison. At least the data suggests that so far, which was helpful.
Yeah. Excellent. Any other questions on your mind? No.
Okay, I have to finish this session here. Thank you very much.